25 metres back. Bernard Foley.
It's got the legs.
It's got the legs. The distance. Over!
Hello and welcome to Pick and Drive Rugby. We're the People's Podcast, providing a platform for rugby lovers to come together and support the game that's played in heaven. I'm your host, Ando, and with me in morning are Mitch and Lockie. Mitch, how are you feeling, mate?
Pretty devastated, to be honest. We've just had the Perth Sevens finals be played half an hour, not even, ago. And not the result that the Aussie teams wanted or probably deserved in the way that they had played the tournament. Very good tournament from them overall, but yeah, pretty deflating finals series.
Lockie?
Gutted. Absolutely gutted, mate. If there's one thing worse than getting silver, it's getting 2 silvers. And I'm so proud of the overall performance to get to a home final in Perth. They did so well. They fought against adversity, and we'll get into it, but a lot of cards as well to get there. But going down, the girls and then the boys losing in finals, it hurts in a different way to them getting knocked out early.
Mate, I'm going to rip in later when we actually go through the sevens because I am pissed. But for now, let's be professional, hey? And let's just quickly remind our listeners that we have changed the format of our podcast. We're now going to be releasing 2 shorter episodes each week. For our season previews, they'll be released on a Monday and a Wednesday. Typically, it'll be the Monday interview with a person from the club, and then the Wednesday will be our predictions and kind of going through the squad and then changes and the like. Now, because we've had a couple of big events, we're also adding on a little comment about the sevens, which has obviously been happening over the weekend, as well as the big news coming out in the last week about the Melbourne Rebels. I will just say that the news about the Rebels going into voluntary administration occurred after my interview with Nick Stiles. So there was obviously no opportunity for us to speak to him about that because chronologically it didn't work. So with that said, tonight you're going to be hearing from the GM of rugby, the general manager of rugby at the Melbourne Rebels, Nick Stiles. We'll speak about the sevens, the Rebels, and then jump into things from there. So we are very, very excited to let everybody know that we have the best Australian rugby community going around, which is our Discord channel. You can find the links to join that on any of our social media platforms. And then one last quick thing. Can you please, if you like what we do, give us a review, please, on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please. It really, really helps our podcast get shared and more people hear the good news and the gospel of Australian rugby. So without any further ado, let's jump into the Rugby Sevens.
Well, gents, we are facing a Sunday night of mourning here. You'll be listening on Monday, and it will be Monday morning continued in much the same mood because we have 2 silver medals coming out of the Perth Sevens, the inaugural event where our Aussie Sevens men and women went down in back-to-back gold medal games. First, the Golden Girls falling agonisingly short against Ireland, 19 points to 14. The Irish got up before Argentina put on a bit of a clinic against our men, running out 31-5 victors. Gents, first impressions of a night with 2 grand final losses. Mitch, how does that feel?
Yeah, it hurts. It really does. And it's not an accurate representation of the way that both teams had played the whole tournament. They played really, really well. And the Aussie women only picking up 1 loss throughout the series. Their first loss of the 2023-2024 World Series for Sevens, which was a massive achievement for them up until that point. They did get a red card to Tegan Levi in that game, and they actually got 2 red cards throughout this tournament. So lots of cards to talk about, but just not able to get over that hump in that game, which probably would have seen them maybe potentially face someone else in the final. But coming up against the final, they did get Tegan back. They lost her through HIA in the game. They lost Bien Tarita as well due to an ankle injury. And without those 2 star players, Maddie Levi also on the sideline through another red card. Without those 3 players able to have their impact on the game, they just weren't really able to take the game by the scruff of the neck in the final there. And Ireland, to their credit, played very well, played very good sevens rugby, and kept the ball off Australia for the majority of that game.
and we will get to the men as well in a tick. But Ando, I know you're itching to talk about that girls' final. A last gasp try there to Eve Higgins, sealed at Charlotte Caslick. Also saw yellow in the big dance as well, running out 5-point losers, and you could see the hurt on them. What stung you about this game?
Mate, I hate it. I'm so pissed off. And for anybody that takes the moral high ground and says, oh, the women need to be the ones that are the determiners of their own fate, they've got to get the red cards down. Yeah, shut up. Shut up. Nobody wants to hear it in this moment, okay? Basically, I'm pissed off because you know how you get those 50-50 rock moments where the player does have a bit of clearance when they go down for the jackling of the ball, and it's up to the ref to determine whether or not they think it's enough. Well, in 3 key moments throughout the game, we got pinged when on another day we would have got those turnovers. And the 2 that happened right at the end of the first half resulted in a pressure that led to Charlotte Caslick getting yellow carded. And then the third major one that happened was right at the end of the game, right before the match winning try to Ireland, when Charlotte Caslick was on the ball, had made the tackle, released, got up on the ball, and then got pinged again. And then they did a quick tap and got the try. So I'm just pissed that our women weren't able to ride the luck to overcome the challenges, some of which were self-enforced that they'd faced throughout the tournament. Yeah, they need to bring the tackle height down. Yeah, they're unlucky that they had injuries to 2 players as well throughout the tournament. It just sucks that even despite those challenges, the ref made calls which I can get uppity and pissed off about, which resulted in us losing the final at home in front of an excellent crowd. I'm just frustrated.
No, understandably. And Mitch, if we look over to the boys as well, who didn't have as good a record heading in, obviously the girls dropped their 1 game against Great Britain on the way through to the final, but the boys were lucky to qualify in the end. They got one of the wildcard spots after losing to the USA and Ireland in the pool stage. They only got up over Great Britain by a couple of tries, but went on to put in incredible performances in their quarter and semi-finals.
Yeah, the Aussie men's had a bit of a mixed tournament. As you just highlighted, they didn't start the pool stages off very well. That extra point, golden point try to USA and then going down to Ireland. Like they had their opportunities, but they just weren't seeming to take them. Whereas the women were taking their opportunities throughout the pools and were punishing their opposition. But once it got into the playoffs, they did really well. They played like a completely different team, really. They changed the way that they approached the game, and Maurice Longbottom really stood up and just had an absolute powerhouse performance through all of the finals. Come the final this evening, it's kind of hard to sit here and talk about it, really, because they didn't really fire a shot. And credit to Argentina, we were completely outclassed, and Argentina did everything perfectly and just didn't allow us any ball. I think Australia had their hands on the ball for maybe a minute of the whole 14 minutes of that game.
No, it was a total shutout. And that last try there, Maddie Gonzalez, really well taken, but it was the first time we'd had the ball all game and we scored. So imagine what you can do with a little more time in possession. But Argentina, the form team on the men's circuit at the moment, back-to-back wins over Australia in the finals. They did us in Cape Town and they've done us again here. Ando, overall, we've got to say that the experience in Perth looked terrific. A full house for the final day.
Yeah, completely agree. I think the tournament in Perth has been a great success. The rugby community has really got behind it. It helped that the Aussie teams did get through into the finals as well, obviously. So it meant that more and more people wanting to turn up on the Sunday for the matches. I think it was a really, really well-run tournament. And as somebody that had been to the Sevens in Sydney, it looked like the crowd and the community seemed to get behind the rugby or the event in a more consistent fashion maybe than they had at Sydney. So well done. And for anybody looking at home who is looking at maybe some of the seats not being full and going, oh, how could it be a sellout crowd? Just remember that the passes are for the day. So you can sell out a crowd for the day and not have everybody there at the exact same time. Plus, it was really, really hot. So a lot of people looking for shade, off getting drinks or standing, watching it from somewhere else instead of being directly in their seats because they've been in the sun for most of the day. So overall, great event. Really well done to all the teams involved. I'm just still really, really pissed off, particularly for our Aussie women.
Totally agree. And Mitch, we'll finish on a quick high. couple of standouts from the girls for you. I thought BB Tarita had a brilliant tournament. Who else stood up in the girls?
Yeah, I thought Tarita, as you highlighted, was probably the standout player for us, and we missed her in the final there. She's shown, again, across her time at the Wallaroos and in the Sevens program that she's just gone from strength to strength. I thought Tegan Levi was really good in the minutes that she played. Yes, she had the tackling issues and the sort of the time away from the field in this tournament and put the Australian team overall under a lot of pressure. But when she was on the field, you could definitely see the impact that she brought. And I mean, we talk about players and how good they are consistently, and Charlotte Caslick is a player that you just expect her to be fantastic. But again, she led this team so well in this tournament. If she wasn't there, I don't think they perform half as well as they did. Not only is she the leader of the team and doing the like the media and the huddles, but she's also talking to the girls and putting arms around them off the field. So she's just not only a great Sevens player, but she's just that type of leader like Michael Hooper, who just being on the field and in the team lifts the players around her.
And Ando, a couple of standouts from the men. You mentioned Moz Longbottom. Mitch, who else could you add to that, Ando?
Oh, look, I almost don't want to add anybody else because Moz Longbottom was just so incredibly good. I think it was great to see Hutchinson back after his injury. So that was really good to see. And Matty Gonzalez looked good on the opportunities he got near the end of the game when he came on. He's been returning from injury. So good to see him getting back into the team and back onto the field again. So there were some good performances throughout. But yeah, again, just frustrating they weren't able to put it together on a more consistent fashion.
I have to also shout out Ben Dowling. I thought he has been a player, maybe a development player over the last year. And, you know, seeing him had time with the wider squad at the Waratahs and moved into the Sevens. And he had a really good tournament. He played a lot of minutes, more minutes than I thought he was going to get at Sevens, considering it was our home tournament. So, yeah, really impressed with him, particularly with how he played in the finals and took that high ball in the sun and then got completely knocked out by the Argentinian player taking him high in the air. But also Darby Lancaster, incredible performance. Had a preseason with the Rebels, wasn't officially in the squad, through injuries, got the call up, and he had some pivotal moments for the team throughout all of their pool stages. So a really impressive performance from him as well.
For sure. And just to round out, Mitch, we got a couple of fan picks come through.
We have. So it's so great to see our Pick and Drive fans that have actually attended the Sevens in person. So the first photo that we've got up here on the screen, if you are following on YouTube, is our fan Brian Knight, who was able to catch up with Sir Bill Beaumont, the head of World Rugby at the Sevens in Perth. He sent this sneaky photo through, and we do have to shout out his club that he's repping, the great shirt that he's got on there in that photo, the Rocking Chair Rugby. That's fantastic. The Golden Oldies is their club, so he's still out there playing and having a great contribution in Western Australia. So Brian's a great fan of ours and has been contributing to that podcast a lot over the last few years. He was over in over in France for the World Cup and sent some stuff through, some pics of the game over there as well. So thanks for sending those in. Hopefully he's hopefully not got into Bill's ear too much about how great Perth is and didn't sort of give him the final away, and we can keep that over on the East Coast. And the other photo we've got here is Pod Friend and family member Simo, who've had on the pod before for our Western Force previews in the past. This was him in his rugby club. So they've all G'd up and got, I don't even know how you would describe that outfit, but just a lot of color,
Glorious.
A lot of skin, but all got into the same atmosphere and got out there and supported the Sevens as well. So fantastic to see some fans of Pick and Drive Rugby and just rugby fans in general out there supporting the Australian Sevens.
That's right. And I think that'll wrap up our Perth segment, guys. Let's move on to the Rebels.
All right, we move now to the biggest news in Australian rugby over the last week or so, which is the major concerns for the viability of the Melbourne Rebels moving forward. Now, it was a very somewhat timely, somewhat unfortunate timing for this news to drop, because we had just done our interview with Nick Stiles, and then literally the next day this information comes out. So it just meant that we weren't able to speak to him directly about it. Now, I'll give listeners a bit of a rundown on where things are at with the Rebels. just to provide a bit of context for our discussion. So when the Rebels for a long time have struggled financially, they're in the singular most competitive sporting market in the world, and they have struggled financially to keep themselves afloat. And for a large portion of their existence, well, actually for their entire existence, they've been relying upon funding from Rugby Australia to be coming through, some of which comes from the broadcast contract and some of which I'm not sure. But either way, what has essentially happened is that the Rebels have had to meet with a company called Wexted Advisors on Thursday of last week in order to have urgent and critical discussions about how to face their financial challenges that they are currently facing. It is reported that the club has an estimated debt of around about $10 million. Okay, so that's the first part. The Rebels had, according to the Australian, requested a $500,000 cash injection recently from RA to make sure that players and staff were paid, but were denied by RA. And the part of the challenge that the Rebels are facing is that they previously were receiving 1.7 million per season from Rugby Australia. All Super Rugby teams were, but that got slashed as a result of the COVID pandemic. So Rugby Australia had to basically slash everything, and they had to take 1.7 million away from the Rebels. Long story short, the Rebels are technically not in voluntary administration yet. What that would essentially mean is that they're getting external people to come in and sell off their assets or look at ways in which the company can directly become viable again. They're not yet at that exact stage. They're kind of trying to dance on the tightrope to avoid moving into voluntary administration. The players have been guaranteed, the players and staff have been guaranteed that they will have their contracts and pay honoured for the 2024 season. But there is no guarantee of anything beyond 2024. The final thing I'll say, Mitch, before I then kind of hand over to you for your immediate thoughts, is the Melbourne Rebels chairman, Paul Doherty, his company, BRC Capital, has a debt of over $50 million, and they're one of the main backers of the Rebels. And so when you have a major backer like that going into such huge amounts of debt, that provides a bigger concern, well, an additional concern that the Rebels are facing as well. So there's a lot going on here. I will just say that neither Mitch nor I are financial gurus. So a lot of what I've taken has come, what I've said has just come from various articles speaking to it, some from ESPN, some from Fox, and some from The Raw. Okay, so those are the sources that I've used, as well as the Financial Review. So Mitch, your initial thoughts on this massive news which has rocked the rugby world so far?
Yeah, look, it's a bit of a shock, to be honest. That's come out here. We knew for a few years that the Rebels have been financially maybe unviable or sort of tipping towards that direction. The fact that they just haven't over the past few seasons been able to secure long-term high-end talent over their playing roster, that they've had issues in paying players, and we know, if we look over the history of Australian rugby, that whole period of having to cut a team when we ended up cutting the force, and then the Rebels were sort of bought by RA at that period for about $1. All of those things, like, the Rebels haven't been trending in a much better position since that period of time. So in some ways, I guess the financials isn't a surprise, but it is disappointing to see that we are now talking about the fact that the Rebels financially may not be able to continue in Super Rugby post 2024. What the future looks like for the club. Can we, as a sport, afford to lose the Rebels or lose that presence in the sporting market in Victoria and in Melbourne particularly? I'm not too sure. My big questions come around what obligations fall on Rugby Australia and the amount of money that Rugby Australia might end up losing. Should we lose the Rebels in 2025, then you would imagine that the Victorian government, who is currently putting lots and lots of money into rugby, they secured the Bledisloe Test last year at the MCG. They've paid for and won the rights to Super Round for the last 3 seasons. There's talks that they are highly keen to get the Rugby World Cup final in 2027. That they're willing to outbid any other state to make sure that it does get played at the MCG. And then we have the Lions coming in 2025. So not only is there a test against the Rebels lined up on the books, but I think the Victorian government is keen to have a test played in Melbourne as well. So if the Rebels do end up folding and we don't have that presence in the market, does that all of a sudden mean that the Victorian government loses that interest in hosting those big events and wanting to have the sport of rugby union being played? And what does that mean for RA as well?
Yeah, look, there's a whole bunch of questions that come from this, and the $50 million is what's being touted as the Victorian state government putting to RA to try and buy the Rugby World Cup final at the MCG, which is money that Rugby Australia just desperately needs. So that does call that into question. Additionally, big questions need to be asked about the Rebels management over the last few years to allow debts to skyrocket to this amount. Now, I know that a lot of clubs are going to be struggling as a result of COVID and the impact that that's had. But I mean, we were down there for Super Round. You look at the crowds and the like that are coming to the Rebels matches, and the crowd attendance is low.
Yep.
The crowd attendance is low. And the Super Round, the first iteration of Super Round wasn't great. The second was improved, and we're hoping that the third this year, again, will be an improvement upon the second. But there's obviously some challenges that are going on down in the market where a lot of the good movements that you will hear from Nick Stiles about the direction of the team and the work that they're doing to connect with the grassroots of Victoria to build up a quality and consistent playing roster, it's almost like it's all just come too late. It's all just too late to make a difference considering the financial struggles that they're in. And when we then tie that in, and I'll throw this back to you as well in a moment, we know Matt from Gold Digger Rugby very, very well. And he put out an excellent documentary which was looking into the golden years of Australian rugby, what happened. And essentially the story is the diluting of the player base within a niche sport in Australia has led to the players not being familiar enough with each other, which then means that they don't perform at a high enough level in major competitions and they don't win. So therefore we don't get enough bums on seats, eyes on TVs, ticket sales, news articles, that kind of thing. And that's from a dilution of talent. Now, it may well be seen in certain quarters that this is a golden opportunity to take away one of the Super Rugby teams, arguably the weakest Super Rugby team over the last decade, and say, all right, we're going to take that team out. That means that all the quality players of the Rebels are now going to be available for Super Rugby Pacific teams throughout Australia, the 4 remaining, so that'll improve their quality. Do you reckon how much? That's a hard one, isn't it, mate? Do you think that that's an option that could potentially happen with Rugby Australia?
Well, there is a likelihood that will happen, and my fear is there's 2 ways that decision will go. If it does eventuate that the Rebels do have to fold, we go down to 4 teams. There's 2 ways, and we've already starting to see a little bit of this happening with the news that Kellaway has signed with New South Wales Waratahs for 2025 and from 2025 to 2027. Now, there are reports that he has been in talks with the Waratahs for a while, and this move isn't anything to do with the financials at the Rebels, and he's not sort of jumping ship because he thinks it's going in the wrong direction.
Correct.
But it does go to show that there is player movement. There is interest for players to move around. The 2 ways that I can see this going: one, yes, the successful way would be that we do fold the Rebels. The Rugby Australia topped up Wallaby players, so Kellaway is, as an example, Salakai Loto, you would imagine, Taniela Tupou, because they are contracted long-term with Rugby Australia, we would hope that they would then move on to another Australian Super Rugby club. But the fear is that once the Rebels fold, post-2024, their contracts, regardless of whether it's with Australian Rugby or the Melbourne Rebels, is null and void, and they can then seek a contract elsewhere. And we lose that talent overseas because all of a sudden they've lost faith in Australian rugby, being able to commit to them as players and to commit to their long-term protect them, their best interests, basically, to keep them in Australia. They might see it better to go offshore at that point. So the positive would be that maybe, yes, we can keep that talent. We can disperse it across the Australian landscape and then have more competition, better squads across the other 4 franchises. But the fear is that as a sport and as a governing body, that we aren't able to keep those players in and we just lose all of that talent. The other question then comes into, if that does happen, if we do end up folding the Rebels, what are our contractual obligations to SANZAAR and Stan? The current Stan broadcast deal is, I believe, until 2025 and is up for renewal in 2026. We have a contractual obligation to present a certain number of games with 5 teams. If the Rebels fold next year, what happens then?
Yeah, and I guess I want to put this out there that we're not saying the Rebels should be folded. I want to make that very clear because we actually both like the Rebels, and we're both kind of broad fans of them, and we value the direction that the team has been going in the last couple of years. And I've been drinking the Kool-Aid, particularly after chatting with Stiles and hearing about what they've been doing down in Victoria. But we're just saying that is a direction that could happen in the future, and that there could be some benefits but also some draw size if you're just being ruthless and ignoring the rugby community in Victoria. If Hamish McLennan was still kind of at the helm, I'd be thinking much more on the lines that Rugby Australia would be looking to get rid of the Rebels if they could. I'm not so sure that would be what the current leadership would be looking for. That's a tough one to see. The other thing I wanted to say is if the Rebels were to fold and we ask the question, what happens to the players from Victoria and the pathways that they be looking, what they would be doing? There's also the possibility of maybe Victorian teams or players being channeled through particular pathways like they're currently doing with the West Bulldogs in the Hospital Cup. So currently the West Bulldogs are essentially the Melbourne Rebels, but just playing in the club team and club system in Queensland. And you just wonder if there could be partnerships set up in the future if they had to go down that path. So any Victorian rugby players can go, all right, I still want to play rugby. I'll get to go play for this team in Queensland, in Brisbane, and that would then enable me to then have a genuine shot at being seen and picked for a Super Rugby team. I don't know. But look, I think what we can say is that the fact that it's got to this point is incredibly disappointing. I would really like to see a bit of a defense by the Rebels, an explanatory or a show cause of what happened, what enabled things to get to this financial point. Provide some clarity and don't just blame it on the last couple of years of a lack of 1.7 of RA funding, because 1.7 times 3 is not $9 million. So it obviously some significant shortfalls in finances outside of that funding, which the Rebels need to be in some ways accountable to the rugby public for. And I hope that they can do that because, like I said, I like them. They've been going in the right direction the last couple of years. I like Nick Stiles. I like Kevin Foote. There are a bunch of the players that I really want to see do well, as long as the Waratahs beat them.
Which they didn't beat them both times last year. So, look, there's so much more that can be said about this. If it does get decided either way, what happens, whether they continue, whether they don't, we could have a whole podcast talking about options and suggestions, mergers, acquisition of talent, all of those types of things. But realistically, we have a great interview coming up now with Nick Stiles, and I think that's what people want to hear. So let's finish things off here, talk about the Rebels. We wish and we hope that we can see them in Super Rugby post 2024. It would be really disappointing from an Australian rugby perspective if this is their last season in Super Rugby. And look, we don't know at this point, but if it is, we hope that they make a really strong contribution to the tournament this year, and we can see them play some finals footy at the end of the season. So anything else you want to say about this before we move on to the interview, Ando?
Don't forget that we're going to have a second episode out on Wednesday, so make sure you tune in for our preview and our predictions of the 2024 Super Rugby Pacific season for the Rebels. But let's jump on into Nick Stiles now.
All right, let's go.
So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pick and Drive Rugby. I'm incredibly excited to be here with Nick Stiles, the General Manager for Rugby at the Melbourne Rebels. Nick, thanks for coming. How are you?
Yeah, great, Ando. Mate, pleasure to be on the show for the first time. Looking forward to the chat.
Very much so, very much so. So we are recording on a Wednesday. What is happening today in Melbourne for the Melbourne Rebels?
Well, pretty exciting Wednesday today. It's our third week back in preparations for the season in January, and it's the first week where we've gone to a new training model. So we're actually changing what our week looks like, because this year we've got a lot of, basically all our games are Friday to Friday. So we've gone to a 3-day consecutive training model. So sort of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday model, and then a Thursday off, and then a Friday game. So today's the first week we'll put that into place. So the boys ripped in and trained really well this morning. It helped. It was only 15 degrees and pouring rain this morning. And then compared to yesterday, it was 35 degrees plus. So typical Melbourne weather. And then this afternoon, they're currently in the second part of our media day. We did a internal media day in December last year. We've got a lot of content pre-recorded, and today we're doing headshots and team photos and engagement with the Super W side as well. So it's a pretty cool day.
Brilliant. So you're blending that together with the women as well.
Yeah, one of the things, people have been around us a bit now over the last few years. We talk about, a one club mentality. Baden Stevenson and myself, we're sort of showing our age here, Ando, but we came through the amateur era. We played a lot of our, rugby club. We know the importance of having that club environment interaction between the teams, and it's something we've tried to sort of reproduce in the modern day, because so many players these days don't get that experience of knowing what a club's like. So with this bringing the Super W side in under the Rebels banner a couple of years ago, we said, well, let's drive one club. So between the Super W, the men's team, and our academy teams, we try to really link the three of them together and give them that genuine interaction.
We love to hear that. We are massive Super W fans here as well, and love every opportunity to spruik the women too. So it's great to hear about that one club mentality in Melbourne. And I guess that ties into kind of the first line of questioning I'd love to hit you with, which is a bit more about you and your role as GM. So for me, I first heard your name, because I'm a bit newer to the rugby scene and some other people, when you were involved with the Queensland Reds. And then from 2017, you then moved to Japan to be with the Kintetsu Liners. And then in 2021, moved to the Rebels to take up the GM role. So that's pretty varied, a lot of different places that you've been to. But what was it that made you move to Melbourne and say yes to the opportunity to be GM of the Rebels?
Yeah, there's a couple of parts to that question, Ando. Probably from what you stated there is all true, but before that time at the Queensland Reds, I mentioned already, came through the amateur days, played a lot of club rugby. When I finished my playing, I also worked for the Queensland Rugby Union back in the community, so coaching director for the juniors and the suburban back in those days. So had a really good touch point with what the amateur and volunteer rugby involves. And then my first coaching stint was at the University of Queensland. So I coached for 2 years there at Premier grade, and then I went into my first stint in Japan with Kubota. And then went from there to the Western Force and had my first stint coaching rugby there in Perth, which was fantastic time. So sort of, for me, when I sort of finished at the Liners, I sort of felt this role would be perfect for me in the sense that I feel I've been across the whole business. I've been a professional player. I've been a professional coach. I've coached clubland. I've played a lot in clubland. So felt I had a really good touch point across the whole organisation. And it's important to drive what we're doing on the field with the men's and women's teams, but to also understand the importance of how they link then back into the commercial team, link back into memberships, link back into Rugby Victoria. So it was something that excited me and felt my skill set that I'd put together over the previous sort of 30 years would come through nicely.
So then what was the specific mandate that you had as the general manager of rugby at the Rebels? What was it that you were aiming to achieve when you took on that role? Now, all right, let's re-go again.
Sorry, yeah, and the second part to your question, Ando, is probably more than around where the organisation was in their growth. When I came back from Japan, there was a couple of things. The people involved at the club, I knew the chairman, the CEO, and then the head coach. I had various interactions with all of them over time, and I wanted to be involved with good people, and that was something that really drew me to come down to Melbourne. And then that the club was in a real big. They made some really big decisions around that they wanted to grow, and they wanted to look at how we grow our cohesion, look at our recruitment of trying to build rather than purely buy. And that was something that I felt that I did really well at the Queensland Reds, and I wanted to come down here and believe in that around having a board, having a CEO, head coach, an organisation that really wanted to grow and develop rather than look for a quick fix. So that's what drew me down to Melbourne.
Yep. And I think that speaks really well to some of the commentary or criticism that could be labelled at the Rebels traditionally, is that they haven't always had a homegrown player base, or they've often had players like Danny Cipriani coming into the Rebels for a year or two. Like those types of big name imports that are there for a year, get a lot of attention, but don't stay to improve the club over the longer term. So what are you and the Rebels trying to do in what is the most saturated sporting market in Australia, Victoria? What are you trying to do to ensure that the club is successful, particularly considering what we've heard about some of the concerning financial things which have moved on now?
Yeah, and sort of probably you mentioned, it's the most saturated market in Australia. It's the most saturated market in the world. There's more professional sporting teams here in Melbourne than there is in any other city worldwide.
Wow.
So the market is incredibly tough. But I think we learnt, setting up a club from scratch with limited support is difficult. You look at how the AFL, the NRL set up teams now. They put hundreds of millions into these teams and draft concessions, multiple things. So, it wasn't easy when the club was set up. We had some fantastic people putting the club together and trying to put together the best team they could. So that's why your Ciprianis and those style of players came here. But what we've seen is none of that genuinely works. It's about building. And a big part of that is really embracing the community. While Melbourne's rugby community isn't huge compared to a Queensland or New South Wales, what we do is we have a very strong and loyal group of people in Victoria. And we've got a really big Pacifica community down here. It probably helps that the big physical Pacifica players don't suit AFL. So then the AFL scouts aren't out in the suburbs trying to poach a lot of these players. So it's up to us to make sure that we're doing a fantastic job of providing an opportunity for a young Victorian player to come through the pathway and now aspire to be a Melbourne Rebel. And, over the last 12, 13 years, I think we're in a position now when we're doing that. You've got that senior group of players that were all at the World Cup, Geordie Ulisi, Pone Famasuli, Paddy Leota, all born and bred talents. And you throw into that, Robbie Leota, another Victorian born and bred player that's come through the pathways, that Victorian rugby is actually producing a lot of players that are going on and playing for Australia, and we're proud of that. And I feel we've got another crop of young guys coming in under those original Burn boys that, they sort of self-nicknamed themselves. We've got Daniel Maiafi, Liafi Talatina, Isaac Kaleo. So we've got another crop of players, Tavi Tuitu Pilotu. So we've got another crop of players that are so invested in the Melbourne Rebels, having come through the juniors, the school system, and now playing with the Rebels, that we feel we've got a base to grow on. And then we've gone about trying to recruit some of the best players to bring down to the club early and develop, and then also bring in some key acquisitions like we have done.
Yeah, and we might just jump to that question right now because it does feed in really well. How was it that the Rebels were able to get probably the biggest signing in Australian rugby this season, Taniela Tupou, down? And does it coincide with the KFC partnership that just got announced?
Yeah, listen, I know Alex Murphy and a few of the other boys would like to think that, Taniela signed on the dotted line once we ticked off that KFC sponsorship. But no, that didn't have anything to do with it. Taniela's a player that obviously came over to the Queensland Reds from New Zealand as a schoolboy. I happened to be coaching the Reds at that time, so formed up a really good relationship with Taniela, and it was something that even though when I was moved on from the Reds, that we stayed in contact over time, and there was a high level of respect in that relationship. And so I think Taniela got to a point where he felt like he'd probably stagnated a little bit, felt like a change. Randomly texted me one day. I was walking through town. I think I was on Little Collins Street, and I got a random text number come in because Taniela had changed his number, and it said, "Oh, are you looking for a tight head next year?" And I said, "Oh, mate, who's this? I'm always looking for players." And he came back and said, "It's Nella." And very skeptical of the text messages coming from a random number. So I went back to Instagram because that's normally how we'd communicate through that. And I said, "Mate, did you just text me? I got a random mate." He said, "Yeah, mate, that's me." And so from that text message, probably another 12 months down the track, we got to the point where he signed on and he's down here. And I think the change has been very good for him. The environment we have here at the club, around Kevin's culture, the love culture, and is something that he's a lot of the Pacific boys really fit into nicely. And Taniela's loving the environment. But the big thing when we sat down with Taniela, he said, "Are you serious about winning? Oh, I only want to go to a club that wants to win." And it was great to see that his motivation was being driven by winning. I know it's a stupid thing to say, but ultimately he wanted to be in a club where he knew his environment that was going to do everything they could to be better and to win. And Taniela's really enjoying that. We're looking forward to getting him out in the field come round one.
How is he going in terms of his progression back from injury and the like? We've had a couple of questions, one from Chop, another from Hugh Tyndall, just about his fitness and whether he will be good to go come week one.
Yeah, listen, he's had a pretty disrupted last 2 years, hasn't he? Did the calf injury for the Reds and then snapped his Achilles playing for the Wallabies. And it's quite not ironic. But when we did present to him, pitched to him about coming to the Rebels, I put together some stats around how minutes he'd actually played for the Reds in the previous 3 seasons. And competition wide in all players, I think he'd played the second most amount or third most amount of minutes in the whole competition over those 3 years. And
Wow.
I said, "Mate, if you keep getting pushed out like that, you're going to break down." And unfortunately for him, he did do that. And so we brought him into our environment and worked closely with Rugby Australia around how we can maximise a program for Taniela that gets him to peak fitness to be able to play rugby that we know he can play. So he's going really well. We've made sure we haven't rushed him straight back into rugby post the World Cup. He's built up over that time since he got to us in December, and he's now at a position where he's dropped some weight and physically he's joining into most of the rugby now and looking very good.
Very exciting. We run a fantasy draft rugby competition as well, so a few managers are going to be very happy to hear that he's in good nick and in good shape. Now, that kind of speaks to some of the squad rotation, squad turnover that the Rebels have experienced over the last couple of years. From last season to this season, we've lost Hodge, Phillip, Hardwick, Ioane, Hosea, Moore, but those are just some of the big names. We've had the arrival of Lukan Salkai-Loto, Nella, of course, Matty Proctor. What are the Rebels trying to do to ensure that the players that have come in integrate quickly and hit the ground running, and we don't have a repeat of some of the moments last season where there were some heavy defeats or giving up of big leads? And watching those games back, it just seemed like at points there was a lack of connection between players. Maybe they didn't trust the players inside and out. What are you trying to do to ensure the squad stays and grows together well?
Yeah, there's a few things there. Listen, firstly, some of those players that did move on, Hodge, Hardwick, and Matt Phillip in particular, are guys that had been in the club for a long time.
The legends
These
of the
days,
club, yeah.
this day and age, the players don't play for one club their whole career anymore. Those days are gone. So, Hodge was the first player to play for 100 games for the Melbourne Rebels. So he was a fantastic servant to the club. His plans had always been to stay until that World Cup in France and then transition on, same like as Hardwick and Matty Phillips. So you always get a natural bit of churn post World Cup. That's you can't avoid that. So it sort of allowed us as well then to go and target some key players for us that we wanted to have in the squad for the next 4 years. And so those players that you mentioned, Lucan, Taniela, Matty Proctor, all signed multi-year deals. We all feel that they're very experienced players and bring a point of difference to us that we feel will take our game to the next level. Taniela's scrummaging, his ball carry, his impact, what he has. Lucan's a massive human. I do not know how the Wallabies did not take him to the World Cup. But to be honest, it was something that's worked out well for us because he has been at the Rebels now since I think he arrived late August. So now he's been with us for multiple months of training. He's a dead set leader within the group. And one of the things that I know there's a big point of difference in the squad this year is around accountability. And rather than it coming purely from the coach, we've got some players that have come into the group that were already here that really have evolved as a leader and have brought a really high level of accountability. And Lucan's been one of those players. And him being here since then means he's a genuine part of the squad and a genuine leader. So he's been fantastic. And then Matty Proctor losing Hodgie. Hodgie, fantastic player, could play multiple positions, but brought a real level of calmness. We wanted to make sure that we replaced Hodgie with someone like Matty Proctor, same thing, experienced player. He's won a World Cup. He's won a Super Rugby title, so he knows what you've got to do to win. He's experienced through his time in Europe, and he's come in and brought a real level of experience to some of the sort of other players in and around him, knowing that we've got some younger centres and outside backs. So he's been great. So really happy that even though we have lost some really big names and legends of the club, that the people we've brought in really offset those guys. The other point that I want to really highlight is that now the bulk of the group, while we did have that senior sort of group leave, the bulk of the squad now has been coming into their third or fourth year with the club. So there's been a real high level of cohesion amongst that group. And we've tried to be a bit different in how we've gone about building that cohesion. Benny Darwin, old Wallabies teammate of mine, front row partner. Ironically,
we've had a chat with him previously, by the way.
Yeah.
So we know all about the big C word.
Yeah, so born on the same day, a few years difference, but a big believer in that, and it's it's simple philosophy, but the whole cohesion and TWI and how we can bridge the gap without a third tier is a real thing. It's not make believe. It's not pretend. It's real. So over the last few years, we've had most of our players playing out of one club up in Brisbane, so trying to drive the cohesion in those younger guys there. We've been proactive about organising extra games overseas, internally as well. So we felt we've done our best that we can to drive that cohesion amongst the squad that sat underneath those senior guys that are left to have come in. So we do feel now that we're in a position that we've been together for a few years now. So there's a real good understanding amongst the group, coaches with the players with the coaches, and player to player. So we feel that's improved. But I think one of the big things we struggled with last season in 2023 was that we played this brand football that now is really getting ingrained into us, but we just didn't have the capabilities to play that for 80 minutes, to play Rebels rugby for 80 minutes. And we've had a change in strength and conditioners. Our head S&C, he moved on and went over to the Stormers with Dave Vessels, connection over there. So fantastic opportunity for him to go over there, but it also allowed us to promote and get a new head S&C. And I think sometimes getting a little bit of fresh fresh blood in a position, brings a little bit of a different style. And we had reviewed really hard and were very critical on our ability to play for 80 minutes last year. So I do think that Luke Vella, our new head S&C, has done a fantastic job on really pushing the players harder and therefore becoming a lot fitter, which will allow us to play for 80 minutes of this, expansive style of rugby that, Kevin's very adamant about us playing.
So what is Rebels rugby? Expansive, full 80 minutes. What else does it encompass?
Oh, listen, I think it's ability for us to back yourself and have a go. Kevin, for those of you who don't know, Kevin, originally South African, played sevens, captain the South African sevens team. So comes from a style of football where you're playing, exciting, and wanting to have a go and back yourself. And so Kevin was really adamant about bringing that style into Super Rugby. You look at how the Kiwis play the game, and they've been the benchmark of Super Rugby, basically the whole time. And they play a style of football that they will back themselves. Their ability to blend between structured and unstructured is unique, and that's the way that Kevin wants to play. And we've got players now that we've recruited in. Another name we haven't mentioned, some of Filippo Dangunu, probably been forgotten a little bit in Australian rugby, but Filippo, Darby Lancaster, Andy Kellaway, Joe Pincus, Lockie Anderson, guys that are fantastic attacking footballers. And so if we've got these players that can excite and play, well, let's play it. We've got a big forward pack that is abrasive, and we want to be physical and dominate contact. But now we've got that blend, I think, with this that style of play of having a go, attacking. I think we've got one of the best 10s in the competition, Carter Gordon, directing things now, and the experience he's had in the last couple of years, ups and downs along the way. He's primed to continue growing. So it's a really good blend between that physicality and the ability to back yourself and attack.
Speaking to that physicality, you could pretty convincingly argue that the Rebels have the biggest pack in at least the Aussie Super Rugby side of the draw. You got Caboose, Pone, Rob Leota, Sam Talakai, Matty Gibbon, Vailani Akwasi, Taniela. I mean, I've barely named any hookers, locks, or most of the back row, and yet those are some absolutely huge human beings right there. At what point does the rubber hit the road and the Rebels' season-long performances need to be stepping up? Because they haven't had a finals berth in 13 years, if we exclude Super Rugby AU. In 2019, finished 11th, 2022, 10th, 2023, 11th. There's so much hope and positivity. At what point can we be seeing what that hope and opportunity come to fruition?
No, 100% right. We haven't played finals, under the proper Super Rugby format, and Kevin has not shied away from that at all through this off season. We admitted what we dished out last year, while we felt was a massive improvement, how we attacked, our ability to score tries. We knew we didn't defend well. We knew we didn't close games out. We weren't fit enough. And has not shied away from that at all, and clearly stated that in a meeting we had back at the start of pre-season last year, which had everyone in there by the Wallabies, and even key stakeholders and board members were all in that meeting. But then what he went on to say is that we want to be the best Rebels team in history coming into 2024. And as you've said, no teams made the finals. So, it's not like we're saying it's an outlandish statement, but to be the greatest Rebels team, we've got to be so much better and feel that rather than sell hope and provide fluff and the normal sort of jargon that you can punch out there, that I feel we've been very understated through everything we've pushed out social media around not trying to create this false hope, but we'll actually show people that how hard we are working, how committed we are to being better, and the focus of being the greatest Rebel side that there has been. And if we do that well, we will put ourselves in a position to be in finals. And we don't just want to be there; we want to be able to get there and play the football that we've been building towards over the last few years.
And that's really hopeful, because I mean, whilst sorry to say I'm Sydney-based. I'm a Waratahs fan, but I do have a massive soft spot for the Rebels. Been down there for the Super Round. Got a jersey in my wardrobe for the Rebels. Absolutely love Australian rugby in a broad sense. As much as it will probably mean the Waratahs lose a few more games as well, it'd be great to see the Rebels up and competitive to the extent that really with the squad that you have, you're capable of playing.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why, I just look at the quality of training that we're having at the moment. Even talking to a player when he came off the field this morning, he said he just feels the growth in the squad with some of those young kids that we had 3 years ago that might have been first year out of school. Now they've been in the program for 3 years. They're hitting their strides. The quality of the Proctors and Dangunus, Luke Arns, Nell, all those guys, what that's brought into the squad. And the intensity that we're having in training, you just feel, and the quality and execution has been lifted so much more than we've had in the past. So he feels the gap between what might be your best side to your second side in training is so much closer, which then allows us to have, a much higher level of training intensity and ability to continue to improve and be challenged across the whole squad. So I reckon that's probably one of the big things for us now, that we do have that depth in the squad, that we can really challenge ourselves to be better.
One of the players that, on a similarly exciting vein, has come into the picture is Darby Lancaster. Is he the Corey Toole of 2024? I mean, obviously he was a gun on the Seventh Circuit last year. How's he adjusting to the 15s game, and how's Lockie Anderson as an ex-Sevens player adjusting to the new guy that's going to be trying to take his position?
Yeah, it was funny. It's funny you mentioned those two. I think in a session yesterday, it wasn't full noise, and Lockie'd been out of training for a few days. I think he needed a new haircut or protect his hairstyle before the media day today. So he missed a few sessions, but Lockie came in, and Darby had been going well. So I think Lockie came in and gave him a pretty swinging high shot to the head to try and take him out and remove that threat from him. But no, listen, they've been good. For your real diehard fans out there, those who had watched the Aussie 20s last year, you would have seen Darby really grow into the 15s game each game he played. And I think it was their last game against New Zealand. I thought his performances there, he came off the wing, went looking for work, got opportunities with his space, just showed what an exciting footballer in the 15s game he can be. And then, when we went aggressively to go and get him, definitely had in mind of what Corey Toole did for the Brumbies, and feel that Darby, given some opportunities, could be that same style of player with that speed. You just can't coach the speed, and you see the excitement when he gets the ball with a bit of space, what he can do. In saying that, he's still learning. He's still adjusting to the amount of work you've got to do in the backfield. Defensively, now it's just a little bit different to that seven style. But I think if you look last year, probably two of the players that did really put their hands up last year was Lockie Anderson, which you mentioned, but also Joe Pincus was another one who both of them had come out of sevens and had missed a bit of football 2 years ago. But to see how they transitioned into 15s last year just shows that I think Kevin's ability to know that sevens game so well, and then be able to bring those sevens players into the 15 side game was a real benefit for Darby, and we're seeing Darby grow each week. So he could be a very, very exciting prospect for us.
Yeah, and I think, look, there's a realistic part of me that thinks he'll probably need a season to bed in. There were moments where Corey Toole looked amazing, and then other times where he got found out a bit defensively. Lockie Anderson, he was awesome last year, but not so much prior to that. And so it just shows, obviously you expect that within any player coming into a new team, but particularly when you're making a transition from sevens to 15s. But who else should we be getting excited about? Maybe some of the younger players that we may not know as well. I mean, Andrew Kellaway, everyone's going to be talking him up. Carter Gordon, There's a smaller version of Carter Gordon at the club. Is he better than the bigger version of Carter Gordon?
No, Mason. No, it's Mason Gordon. For those you don't know, he's a couple of years younger than Carter, as talented as Carter. starting to fill out. I think Mason was probably a little bit leaner than what Carter was at that same sort of time 12 months ago. 12 months ago. So Mason's starting to fill out now to put him in a position to be able to physically, in a good position to play. So he's a very exciting prospect for us, definitely. Another one that I think people might have forgotten about through injury was Glenn Vahu. He, if you remember, 2 years ago, he played every game for us on the wing. And unfortunately, in his last game 2 years ago, where we beat the Highlanders here, did a bad. I think it was bad. Liz Frank's injury to his foot, which ruled him out for the rest of the year, and then did his hamstring in the warm-up game via the Brumbies last year. So he missed all last year as well. So he's just regained real strength through his body, and his training and how strong he's looked has been fantastic. And he was someone that in that game when we went over to Japan and played the Liners back in October, he did things out there that just showed his ability. So he's someone that I'm really looking forward to coming through as one of the younger guys. Who else in the forward pack? You've mentioned Violini before. He had a breakout season for us. Violini Ekasau had some really big performances. He's come back. He's a wrecking ball in training. So, but he's no one new. Probably a name that who's played the last 2 years, but Josh Cam. He
was amazing.
I say his name. That I don't think he's a household name by any stage outside of Victoria, but he went away. He was picked in Australia A. He went in the Barbars tour, and just to see him now physically where he's at and his rugby IQ, see where that's grown from 3 years ago to this point in time, I've got full belief he's going to be someone that's going to be knocking on the Wallabies door moving forward. So another exciting player there. And probably the last one, Isaac Leo. He's been in our squad for a couple of years. Loose head prop. He's gone and played quite a bit of rugby up for UQ in Brisbane over the last couple of years, and he's got fantastic footwork, and he's a powerful carrier. But the part of his game that I've really loved this year is through the preseason has been his scrummaging. When you're packing against Pone and Taniela and Sam Talakai every session, you're packing against world-class props. So his quality of his scrummaging's really come up to meet the rest of his game. So I'm looking for him to have a bit of a breakout season as well.
That's incredibly exciting. Well, as we're bringing things into close, we are having the opportunity to speak to a lot of head coaches before the season begins, and I want to ask them all the same question. For all of the Rebels and Aussie Rugby fans out there, what message do you want to share with them? Why should they be excited about the Melbourne Rebels in 2024?
For a lot of things that we've mentioned before this year, we've had some real consistency through our coaching staff over the last 3 years. We've backed them, we've backed their ability, and now we're seeing a squad that has real clarity in how they want to play the game, which is because with that clarity, then you can really drive your culture and you can drive your intensity through training. So I think we're in a position now where we've got that in the whole organisation from the top down. And then you should be excited about our squad and the capabilities of our players and the depth of our squad, that they're going to be in a position to deliver that clarity of rugby and how we want to play the game and deliver that week in, week out for our fans and the hunger that the squad's got to be the best team we've ever had. So it's an exciting time for us, and we want to reward the people of the loyal fans that we've had for a long time that have been deprived of success, that this year hopefully is going to be their year.
Well, thank you so much for your time. We hugely appreciate it, and best of luck to the Rebels in 2024.
No, thanks very much, Ando. Thanks for having us on.